Each gospel is presented with some level of tension surrounding different perspectives about who Jesus is. Prophet or not, sinner or not, the Messiah or not. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, most of this tension is focused between Jesus and the religious authorities. John's gospel is packed with the same tension between the powerful, but in John, the tension spreads and is experienced by the average faithful listener in the street and in the temple. As average listeners in the street and in worship, we too live in this same tension. Who is Jesus? And am I listening? Can you feel it? Can you feel the enormous amount of tension? Serious tension that is being played out in the gospel lesson you just heard. Well, let me answer that for you. No, you can't feel it. You can't feel the enormity of the situation. You can't feel the high level of tension that is actually present in the text. You can't feel it because you heard today's gospel reading out of context. I know it might sound like a standalone reading, but when you pluck out 9 verses from a 21-chapter book, you can't get the whole picture. This tension started early in the gospel, but it really ramps up back in chapter 7 as sides began to be established, as camps were formed, as tribes strengthened. The festival of the booths in Jerusalem was near, and Jesus' disciples encouraged him to go to the festival so that the people in Jerusalem could witness the works that he had been doing in Galilee. Jesus refuses to go because the Jewish authorities were looking for an opportunity to kill him. They had heard that he had healed someone on the Sabbath. Instead, Jesus sends his disciples to the festival without him. At the festival, the Jewish authorities are out publicly asking people on the streets if they know or have seen Jesus. These inquiries about him stirred up some tension, and I quote, a considerable amount of complaining among the people. Some were saying that Jesus was a good man, and others, they were saying that he was deceiving everyone. Meanwhile, Jesus secretly sneaks into Jerusalem. Once inside the walls, he goes to the temple and starts teaching. Those present were astonished by his level of learning since he had never been taught. I think Jesus was probably a little stressed, and rightly so. He enters into an exchange with some dissenters about how Moses had given them the law, yet no one was following the law, and Jesus asked them why they were looking for an opportunity to kill him if they themselves were not following the law. Well, then the name-calling and dehumanizing begins as someone yells out that Jesus has a demon, while at the same time others, they're asking Jesus, who's trying to kill you? The tension is rising. Conspiracy theories are kicking up too. Some have begun thinking that the authorities, the religious authorities, might actually know that Jesus is the Messiah and they're keeping it from them. But others say that, well, since they know where Jesus is from, there's no way he could be the Messiah, because when the Messiah comes, they will not know where he is from. Well, then Jesus yells at them, saying something along the lines of, yes, you do know him, and that they know where he's from, but it is clear that they don't know God. Those gathered tried to arrest him. And then the chief priests and the Pharisees sent the temple police to arrest him, and Jesus spouts off, they will search for him, but they will not be able to find him. And where he will be, they will not be able to come. Well, this really confused everyone. And you know, when there's confusion, it just raises tension, because now they actually think that he's going to go hide out with the Greeks. It says that. Well, Jesus escapes, only to come back again the next day. He started preaching some good stuff about how anyone who was thirsty should come to him and drink living water. Again, since he was filled with such knowledge and he's this poor kid from Galilee, this only created more tension and division because everyone knows the Messiah is not going to come from Galilee. Text says it's going to come from Bethlehem, the village where David lived. Again, the people wanted him arrested. But the temple police went back to the authorities empty-handed. And when asked why they had not arrested Jesus, the temple police answered, "Never has anyone spoken like Jesus." So they could not bring themselves to arrest him. As you can imagine, this really upset the Pharisees so much that it was even implied and spoken there that they were willing to break the law to have Jesus killed without a proper trial. They must win at all costs. Can you feel the tension? You know what Jesus did? He went back to the temple the next day. And it was then that the scribes and the Pharisees brought in a woman who had been caught in adultery, and they were going to stone her to death. Now, I'm surprised Jesus didn't ask them why they only brought in the woman caught in adultery and not the man as well. But instead, Jesus bent down, and he drew with his finger in the dirt and then said, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Well, they dropped their stones and walked away. New Pharisees came in, so Jesus continued his preaching. In doing so, Jesus tells them that their father is a devil and a liar. I've never experienced Jesus' humanity quite so strongly than what I'm hearing in the text. The Pharisees' rebuttal was that they called Jesus a Samaritan, and not just your regular low-life Samaritan. Of course, a Samaritan with a demon. There's a theme going on with the demon stuff. This became more than your average schoolyard banter when those opposing Jesus picked up stones to throw at him. Once again, they want to stone him on the spot. But he was able to hide and slip out of the temple. The next day was the Sabbath, and while Jesus was walking to the temple, he came across a man who was begging, a man who had been blind since birth, and Jesus spit in the mud and packed it on this guy's eyes and sent him off to wash. And in doing so, his sight was restored. The newly healed man was brought before the Pharisees, which created more tension and more division because some believed Jesus could not be from God because he, once again, did not observe the Sabbath. Others went the opposite direction, realizing that only someone from God could heal a man blind from birth. They didn't care that it was done on the Sabbath. Must be important. I can feel the tension. And we didn't care that we get calls on the Sabbath. You see, progressive and conservative lines are being drawn. Jesus enters into another conversation with the Pharisees in which he once again calls them sinners. Then to all present in the temple, Jesus launches into a trilogy of teachings that we call the Good Shepherd. One story where the sheep know the shepherd's voice and follow him, one where Jesus is the gate and whoever enters will be saved, and one where the Good Shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. Now this series ends with more division, as someone again says that Jesus, and I quote, has a demon and is out of his mind. Why listen to him? Others were saying Jesus' words could not be from a demon because demons can't heal the blind. Now this brings us to today's reading, which, like I said before, when you read it itself, it does not set the scene. It actually sounds pretty respectful and pleasant. It actually sounds like people are curious and they want to know more. Jesus is asked, "How long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Messiah, tell us plainly." Jesus answered, "I have told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name testify to me, but you do not believe, because you do not belong to my sheep. My sheep hear my voice. I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they will never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand. What my Father has given me is greater than all else, and no one can snatch it out of my Father's hand. The Father and I are one." Now that's where we end today's reading. The Father and I are one. We never hear on Sunday what happens next. It doesn't show up on Sunday. But the very next sentence is, "And they took up stones again to stone Jesus." We take this little reading that just sounds like there's having a nice conversation. But they took up stones again. But before they could stone Jesus, he replied, "I have shown you many good works from the Father. For which of these are you going to stone me?" They answered, "It is not for a good work that we are going to stone you, but for blasphemy, because you, though only a human being, are making yourself God." For those who want to stone Jesus, they could only hear his words and how they differed from their own beliefs. Now, Jesus' words differed from their beliefs. The tension in their differences blinded them from truly seeing Jesus' divine works. Their differences blinded them from seeing good in someone different. They wanted him dead because Jesus said, "I am God's Son." His loving actions didn't matter. Here's where the tension lies. When we are set in our ways, when we are set in our traditions, when we are set so firmly in our comfortable beliefs that we cannot see any good works but those that come from our own truths, we have picked up boulders the size of mountains and stoned ourselves. I mean, what we desire is not much different than those people in today's gospel. "Jesus, tell us plainly." But Jesus says, "I've told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name testify to me, but you do not believe, because you do not belong to my sheep. My sheep hear my voice." John's gospel is packed with tension about who Jesus is and who can and cannot hear his voice. We live in this same tension. Who is Jesus in my life? And is that his voice I'm following or someone else's? I mean, are we so wrapped up in other people's words that we stop experiencing all goodness within them and stop responding with goodness of our own? The scribes and Pharisees, or almost all of them, refused to even consider that they could be wrong. They refused to consider that God could be at work in something that they disagreed with or something that they didn't understand. They refused to back away from their tunnel vision and see a wider picture. They refused to imagine that there is a perspective worth experiencing from the cheap seats in the balcony, a perspective that can't be seen from the top dollar seats on the front row. My hope for me and for you is that before we pick up stones within our overpowering tensions in our lives, that we can just climb a little higher, take a broader view, and listen for the goodness of Jesus calling our names. Amen.